Hello everyone, welcome to Planet Holistic. I'm your guest host today, and Mackie Morelli. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. Today we have two very special guests, Christy Blakeway and Catherine Ferguson. The three of us are some of the 101 authors who've contributed narratives to the collaborative book entitled Inspirations, 101 Uplifting Stories for Daily Happiness. It's a book that's set to be officially launched and released on October 6th. We are also, all three of us are engaged in solo projects as well, writing individual books sort of in areas of passion or focus. Christy's actually got hers a little further along. She's ready to submit it for copy editing. Catherine's sketched an outline for hers, and mine I'm in the phase of editing as well. So it's exciting times for all of us as authors. And it was interesting as I was writing and working on the two articles that I was contributing to the book, Inspirations, I began to realize what a solitary, introverted activity writing is. And consequently, it means that writers are often with their own thoughts much of the time, thinking and processing and analyzing. And I became very curious about the emotional aspects of writing and how authors balance the tension between sort of keeping their own voice, staying true to their vision for the book or their article, and then also balancing that with how will that be received? What kind of feedback will my editor give me or my publisher? Will it be successful more broadly than that? And how do you balance those two things? And so I wondered about that. And so today when we were meeting, Christy, Catherine and I were meeting in a Starbucks just to sort of support one another as authors, I decided to ask them a couple questions around that. And how did they stay focused and not allow other voices, negative feedback or comments on their writing, or even other people posting on social media about their book success? How do they let that or prevent that from not discouraging them or distracting them from what they are trying to do and the work that they are creating? So today's podcast with Christy and Catherine, we're going to focus on that question. And so you're going to hear me asking them some questions about that idea of balancing the tension, the emotional side of writing. It was fun because we were in the Starbucks and it was really noisy, so we decided to go out into the parking lot, and you'll hear that there might be cars. There was definitely a crow serenading us as we were doing it, but I hope you enjoy it. They have some wonderful insights about their honest discussion around how, yes, they do have to balance that, and how sometimes negative voices can creep in, and how do they battle that so they do stay focused on what it is they're trying to accomplish. So thanks for joining us, and I really appreciate Christy and Catherine for engaging in this discussion with me, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are at the time you're hearing this message. We're sitting out with two authors that are contributors to the Inspirational Collective book, with articles that have been contributed by a wide range of authors who are writing about stories that have inspired them. And so they are the two that I have with me. We've just been in Starbucks. It's been too noisy to record in there, so we're now sitting out on a parking lot. You'll hear a crow serenading us, a car driving by, but we're just going to try to dial in and focus in on the interview, so bear with us. But I have with me Catherine Ferguson and Christy Blakeway, and I'm going to ask them a couple questions around the emotional side of writing. I'm really curious about how do writers, it's such a solitary, introverted activity, how do you battle sort of the balance between staying focused on what you want to do and what you want to achieve, and how we can get distracted by discouragement? Christy, let's start with you.
Sure. So I find that when I am feeling emotional about something, writing is almost my go-to strategy. So sometimes when I write, I'll write just for myself, and I won't know if I will end up sharing it, but it's a way of processing emotion and getting my thoughts out on paper. But I was telling Anne that I have found, now that we're working on books to be published, that I do have this lingering voice at the back of my head that says, how will you handle when someone posts a comment that's negative or doesn't support your writing? And I don't know why, because that hasn't happened yet, but I guess it's just that little voice that says, what if someone doesn't like this? And for me, I feel like it's more important for me to tell my truth and write authentically, because then I'm comfortable in my own skin with what I've written, instead of writing to please people. So that's been my focus.
Okay. So there is this struggle that goes on that you acknowledge, that as you're writing, trying to just stay focused on what you're doing and not let the quiet voice distract you. So it's just sort of digging deep to focus and not let that voice be louder, and somehow overcome that possible roadblock or discouragement that could come from that. Catherine, do you happen to have that sort of struggle too, the balance between that as well?
Yes, I think almost anybody who's putting something, writing to paper, is going to have that little tiny bit of doubt in the back of their mind. But my advice is to do your best to ignore it, which is tricky. However, once you just put pen to paper or fingertips to keyboard, and you just let things flow and see where they land, and try to avoid perfection. I've even, in my past, working with students on their writing, and they don't know how to start, and I will get them drawing, and, start with stick figures. Everybody can draw a stick figure. And just the act of having something looking back at you from the page can sometimes sort of spur you on to continue and to go a little bit deeper. I would also ask, my students, and I've used this for myself, to look at times where I've been successful in my writing, to reflect back on, positive comments. And, I always say it takes 3 positive comments to counteract a negative one. So it's worth it to look back at writing and take the critique that was positive and keep that in the back of your mind, that you can do this, you are doing it, and you can do it well.
I had a second question around that, and it had to do with how you define success in writing, and I wondered how much that influences what you do. I mean, if we define success by, volumes sold or great feedback, then we might be more intimidated. But if we were to be able to judge it on the joy that it brings us, being able to put it down to paper, to produce something, to be creative, engaged in that process, I mean, how much do you think that the way that we approach the task and the way that we define success influences that balance, that emotional balance as we write?
For me, it is a balance, like you say, in that I feel like I remind myself that I'm writing for myself, in that I want to enjoy the journey, and I want to enjoy the process, and know that I accomplished it and I have the book. And I always joke that my goal is for my mom to read it, but then I remind myself that my mom returns everything, so that might not be my one book sold. But at the same time, you also write with the question of who is your audience and how do you appeal to them. So you're balancing the write for others, whereas I guess the sense of accomplishment needs to come from inside and what you've been able to do, instead of the external rewards that may or may not come with it, because it comes from a place of what you're passionate about. And I think it's also a gift for our kids, and to leave with your family that this is who I am, and I hope other people like it too, and if they don't, that's okay.
Yes, I agree with what Chrissy was just saying, and I always like the idea that writing should move the soul. And I think some of the best writing, whether that's from a student in their kindergarten class, just learning how to write a simple message, but could move one's soul. And I think writing should make us feel. That doesn't mean it needs to be positive or joyful. There's pain can also have its own beauty. But I think focusing on monetary things or success in terms of mathematical numbers or statistics is going to lead you down a rocky path. I think it's more important to focus on the emotion of what you are trying to portray, what you're trying to get across.
Well, thank you, ladies, for your insight on sort of that balancing of how do we write and who do we write for and why are we putting it down on paper. And when we do hear the discouraging voices, how do we sort of triumph over those so that it doesn't impede the flow of the words or what we want to write. So we've run out of time, but I thank you so much, Catherine and Christy, for joining me. And it's Mackie Morelli signing off for Planet Holistic. And thanks for joining us today. Bye-bye.